We are live.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll call the admin committee meeting to order. Jenny, could you please call roll?
Ms. Aludo?
Here.
Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Here.
Ms. Fox?
Here.
Great. And so first item, we have some minutes to approve. Could I get an approval of the minutes from the April 22nd meeting?
I move we approve. Oh, I move we approve the minutes of the April 22nd meeting.
I'll second it.
Ms.
Jenny?
Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Did you hear me? Yes.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor DeRosa?
Yes. Great. So we have 3 agenda items on the meeting agenda tonight, and the first one is a continuation of the benefits discussion we had last time. So I will turn it over, I guess, Jennifer, to you or Homer to get us started. Thanks.
Okay, let me just pull up the presentation. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Just making a few adjustments. 1 minute. All right, good evening, members of the Administrative Committee. Tonight is our second ongoing discussion on health benefits. And this discussion was proposed as part of the adoption of the 2020 operating budget. The purpose of these discussions will be to identify an appropriate plan of action with regards to employee health benefits to incorporate into the 2021 operating budget. To present any questions you may have on the information and material presented here tonight, we have Dana McDaniel, the City Manager, Homer Rogers, Assistant City Manager and Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, myself, Jennifer Miglietti, the Director of Human Resources, and Matthew Stifler, the Interim Director of Finance. Additionally, we are joined by our 2 benefit consultants from Oswald Companies, Stephen Moody, the Vice President, Market Leader, Central Ohio, and Tessa Pekarsik, Senior Client Manager. The purpose for this session is to provide the Administrative Committee the information to be used for consideration in regards to any necessary adjustments to the city's health plan benefits. As you can see from the slide, we will be discussing 3 topics of risk mitigation. As a self-funded plan, we have the ability to adjust different levers in the plan, such as plan design, stop loss, which could result in cost savings. We have a lot of data, so I will present all of that tonight and then ask for questions at the end. At our last meeting, we set the groundwork of the health plan. Building on what we did last time, we're going to answer some of your questions that is about your thoughts and considerations for moving forward. We are not necessarily making recommendations tonight, but we wanted to give you information on the levers and controls that we can move and tweak in our program to save money. The city has been good stewards of the medical plan and we have made solid fiscal decisions. By the end of tonight, we would hope to have your guidance on the things that you see listed on the screen. And now I'm going to tell you about each one of these. As promised from our last meeting, we wanted to update this slide and share with you our February and March 2020 data. So we are now through our first quarter of the year. At the last meeting, we only had January data. So as you can see where the big red circle is, we are running at 97.4 of our projections as of March 31st, 2020. Oops. As a reminder, one of the reasons we're discussing this topic in detail was because the city's stop loss premium per employee per month was increasing substantially for 2020. As discussed, United Healthcare revised our stop loss premium in December after our highest cost claimant passed away. After this adjustment, our stop loss premium went down dramatically for an annual savings of $442,600 $442,651 in 2020. So that green bar is what our current rate is compared to what we originally had during our budget time in the fall. So this chart shows our net claims trend increase in spend over the last 5 years. We're going to look at how our health plan compares to others. Here's the impact with the stop loss component. So these numbers include our stop loss claims. This next slide is in regards to a question that was raised in the last meeting, and we wanted to provide some additional information. So as you can see, our high cost claimants, that is defined as claimants over $75,000 or claims over $75,000, totaled $3.7 million, which is 54% of our medical and prescription claims. 5 claimants over the stop loss deductible, which is $150,000, triggered estimated credits to our experience of $2.6 million or 39% of our gross spend. So what is the takeaway from that? 78.2% of our claimants on our plan accumulated 7.1% of paid claims, while 21.8% of claimants accumulated just shy of 93% of paid claims. So I think that speaks to the 80-20 that we had discussed in our last meeting, and we're pretty much on par. So this slide shows claim data for 2019 versus 2018. For a self-funded plan, right now, trend is at about 10%. The city's trend is at 7%, and that includes the above costs we have experienced, including our stop loss claims and our increasing stop loss premiums. In the state of Ohio, medical costs in the central Ohio market are higher than other competing markets like Cleveland, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Detroit. Having OSU and Ohio Health competing in the same market is a primary driver of that cost to the central Ohio market. I wanted to point out that our subtotal cost, which you can see is one of the green circled areas, that is our gross plan spend. While the net total, the bottom green circle, shows what we paid as the actual cost to the city, which is after our stop loss reimbursement. In 2019, that reimbursement was $2.6 million. From this point on, we want to show you what our current plan design looks like. What we see, again, in consultation with Oswald, there have been some options to consider moving forward. So what are the levers we can move up and down that affect some financial impact? Do we absorb increases and pay as we have? Do we continue as is? So we're going to walk through that. So this information shows what the City of Dublin's current plan design looks like for our deductible, our out-of-pocket, and our health savings and health reimbursement accounts. Using Oswald Company's benchmarking data, you can see that the city is certainly in the ballpark for comparison for groups our size, and also when compared to the government industry. We have 2 plan choices at the city, single and family. In 2020, our deductible for a single plan was $2,500 and $5,000 for a family plan. The out-of-pocket maximum was $3,425 for single and $6,850 for family, for a total of $5.3 million. The first row of data shows a green, yellow, and blue box. The green is our current plan design. The yellow shows what our costs would be if we increased our deductible by $500 for the single plan and $1,000 for the family plan, and reduced our coinsurance from an 85-15 split to an 80-20 split, and increased our out-of-pocket maximum $575 for single and $1,150 for family. A little more aggressively, the blue box shows what our costs would be if we increased our deductible by $1,000 for the single plan and $2,000 for the family plan. Again, reduced our coinsurance from an 85-15 split to an 80-20 split, and increased our out-of-pocket maximum to $3,100 for single and $6,200 for family. The cost projections used were a 7.6% increase for 2021 and a 3% for a 2022. Conversely, the second row of yellow boxes shows what our projected spend would be by making no plan design changes for 2021 and 2022. Keep in mind, as a self-funded plan, we can change our deductibles and our out-of-pocket maximums as long as they fit in the IRS guidelines. And so the IRS defines a high deductible healthcare plan as a plan that has a deductible of at least $1,400 for an individual or a single plan, or $2,800 for a family plan, with an out-of-pocket maximum that doesn't exceed $6,900 for an individual or $13,800 for a family. The IRS tends to change those annually. So there's a lot of data on this particular chart that I wanted to walk through and point out each component of it. So this chart represents the number of claimants on our plan for 2019. The x-axis represents the dollar range for claims and the number of claimants in that category. So you can see on the far left-hand side that 284 claimants had claims from $0 to $249. 166, had claims from $250 to $499. 158 had claims from $500 to $999, and so on. The final column shows our stop loss claims, which, as we've discussed, was 5 individuals for 2019. So that was 5 people who had claims over $150,000. The blue line and the blue box represent the amount of money the city provides in either the health savings account or the health reimbursement for the family plan. I'm only going to go over the family rates. The single ones are exactly half of that. The green line shows the family deductible of $5,000, and the yellow line shows the out-of-pocket maximum at $6,850. Once a family reaches the out-of-pocket maximum, the entire family unit has 100% covered healthcare until the plan year expires on 12/31. I'm gonna pause here just so you can take a peek at the screen before I move on. Okay. Some additional benchmarking data from Oswald Companies compares the city's health savings account and health reimbursement contributions to other employees for single and family plans. So you can see where Dublin stands compared to the Midwest in general, government in general, employers of like size, and then all employers. So let's discuss what the impact to the city would be with a reduced health savings account or health reimbursement account employee contribution. So the green box at the top is our current contributions. So single elected plans receive a $1,875 contribution, and a family plan receives $3,750 in contributions. This is 75% of our deductible. For 2020, the cost to the plan is $1.1 million. The yellow box demonstrates what a reduction of $375 to the single plan or $750 to the family plan would be. And as you can see, that would be a $238,000 savings. Clearly, I'm rounding down, but the slide has the exact dollar figure. The blue box represents a reduction of $875 to the single contribution and a $1,750 reduction for a family plan for a savings of $555,000. So switching gears, we wanted to share our research from this past fall when we solicited the stop loss market to review our stop loss policy. We had 7 carriers agree to quote us and 7 carriers who declined. You will see from these 3 rows of quotes that the first one was a quote of $150,000 limit, which is what the city currently has. The second is a $175,000 limit, and the third is a $200,000 limit. So that would be the liability the city had before the stop loss policy would kick in. You will notice that on every quote, except for the 2020 renewal from United Healthcare, which is in the green box, our top two most expensive and reoccurring claims were excluded from these quotes. So they were lasered, which is something that we talked about last time. So as a reminder, a laser is a separate deductible on a known risk. So in addition to the quotes from each vendor, the city would have absorbed the entire risk for our top two stop loss claimants, adding an additional 1.4 to 1.6 million liability with each of those quotes except the one in green. In 2019, our stop loss claims for those two known cases were over $2.7 million. But the city only paid $300,000. They paid $150,000 of each of those two claims. Everything else was reimbursed from our stop loss policy. Ultimately, after going out to market, we decided to stick with United Healthcare's stop loss policy because it was the best decision. Do I need to linger on the slide for a minute?
Yes, I have a question for you, Jennifer.
Sure.
I looked at that and it said laser liability. Okay, so the 550 in 2020 option 1 in Sun Life, is that 550? So where does it pull out that they lasered a couple of people? I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Any claim from Sun Life, they straight up were not going to cover our most expensive claimant, which was a cystic fibrosis patient.
Right.
So Sun Life has a quote in each of the 3 lines. So they didn't even include that in here. So every Sun
Okay.
Life you see, we would have absorbed that entire cost, which
Right.
we finished 2019 at $2.2 million for that one particular individual. So the 550 you see under that option 1 for Sun Life represents the second highest claimant that we have. And so they were lasering that cost at 550. So we would pay the first 550. And if for some reason those claims exceeded that, then stop loss would kick in after that.
Okay, so that's the laser liability line right there. And so
Correct.
I just want to be sure, you're saying then the renewal on UHC, there is no laser liability other than what was originally in our 2019 policy.
Correct. So every single employee at the City of Dublin who's covered has a $150,000 limit, even our 2 highest claimants.
That's great. That's what I just wanted to be sure I understood that. Thank you.
On this slide, if you notice there's an asterisk by the Sun Life, and then you look down in the lower left-hand corner,
Right.
got that red circle.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, that's where it's saying they're not going to cover that larger claim, that we had. So it's not included in the quote at all.
Now, am I correct that we don't have that claimant is deceased?
Correct.
So, okay, so, but you got this quote before that.
Correct. Right. We got this. We usually renew in the August timeframe. So
Okay.
this data is based off of that information that we had available. What we wanted to highlight here is simply some of the work that we did as we go back out to market and evaluate the different vendors who respond to us.
Right.
So
if
that's
you-
what a
if you
recap
don't
of
have
this.
the laser liability from Sun Life or the others, it's possible that you might find some savings or no. Or in other words, you might find a company might be less expensive than Optum UHC.
Sure. Now that dynamic has shifted, absolutely.
Okay.
And we have gone out to market the last 2 years to look at our stop loss because that's where we've seen the greatest increases
Mhm.
is these last 2 years. And the last 2 years, we have still decided to stay with UHC, but we fully intend to go out every year
Okay.
as we see our costs increasing. So
Okay.
we may make a different decision as we renew for 2021.
Okay.
And so green, if you look in that green box,
Yes.
it says per employee per month, it says basically $421. That
Right.
was the original quote that we got. That is now $321.
Oh, it is. Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. Because of that stop loss.
Right.
Correct.
So that 1.8 million you see there is about 75%, or should be about 25% less.
Right. Okay. That's right. Because this analysis was done in the fall. Okay. I've got you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to move to the next one. So as we just said, once we decided to continue our stop loss policy with United Healthcare, we wanted to analyze our stop loss deductible with them. As asked in the previous meeting, we examined what an increased liability would be through United Healthcare at $175,000 and a $200,000 threshold. On pure dollars alone, under option 1, we would have had a $266,000 savings in premium if we had renewed at $175,000 and a $465,000 savings if we had renewed at the $200,000 premium. However, we know there is an additional liability by through increased claims. Because we're self-funded, the risk of claims over $150,000 is an unknown liability in any given year. It could be 0, or it could be 5, or it could be higher. At that time, so during the time of renewal, our most expensive stop-loss claimant was still on the plan, and we weren't sure if that individual was going to be continuing throughout all of 2020. We were definitely apprehensive to make a change in 2020, knowing that there was a possibility the claimant may not continue on the plan. We wanted to take the time to turn over every stone before increasing our liability in premium. So while we didn't choose to take on that liability in 2020, as you just pointed out, we knew it was something we could continue to analyze year after year, which is what we plan to do. Additionally, we also knew that once you go up in premium, it's nearly impossible to go back down. So we wanted to see what the experience was going to finish out before we made any significant changes. Additionally, in early 2018, we sent out a request for proposals through Oswald Companies to evaluate our third-party administrator or carrier. So we had 5 carriers that responded to our RFP and 1 that declined. Ultimately, our top 2 choices were between United Healthcare and Medical Mutual of Ohio. So again, there's a lot of data on this slide, but each provider except United Healthcare of our highest cost claimant, which is part of these costs that you see on the sheet. Of the 5 potential carriers identified, the only quote that is set in stone was United Healthcare because they had all of our previous data and we were currently with them.
Jennifer,
I'm sorry.
can you go back and read that first sentence again? You kind of broke out on me. I don't know if it did everybody else or not.
Sure. Each provider except United Healthcare included a laser of our highest cost claim, our highest cost stop loss claim. So the other vendors were still in underwriting and could make changes to the quotes that you see here at any time as more months of data presented themselves. The other 4 vendors were bringing their best package to the table with the understanding that if our plan did not perform as well as 2018 moved on, the quotes were subject to change. So it's important to note that the fixed costs and the discounts were similar on all of the vendors. There is also an internal cost to changing carriers, and that includes the time to make the transition, employee education, potential claim disruption, and that's just a few. Ultimately, United Healthcare was as good as others we looked at, and we determined that the cost to change and disruption wasn't worth any potential enhanced discounts given at that time. Again, as asked in the last meeting, in consultation with Vital Insight, which was the third-party review of our medical plan, we surveyed all of our employees in April 2018. We sent out a 50-question questionnaire, and we were proud that over 50% of our population actually participated in that survey. So in that survey, our employees identified the top issues that they were concerned with, which you can see are kind of highlighted on this word bubble chart. So the top identified issues were being overweight, having back pain, having trouble sleeping, and anxiety and depression. Other areas of concern included high cholesterol, stress, smoking, migraines, asthma, financial stress. Our employees did express interest in on-site healthy meals, healthy cooking classes, coaching, group exercise classes, and personal dietitian. So I just wanted to go over a few of the things that we actually do offer to our employees. We currently offer numerous opportunities to lose weight, such as a reimbursable Weight Watchers program, Real Appeal through United Healthcare, which is free, and the CHIP program, which Homer spoke about at our last meeting. We offer classes on proper stretching and lifting, how to achieve better sleep. We offered opportunities for all employees to meet with a dietitian one-on-one for an hour up to 3 times throughout the year, and we have done that for the past 3 years. We offer healthy meal options from the Dublin City Schools, and we provide at least 2 cooking class demonstrations each year, not to mention the wide variety of classes available to our employees through our Healthy by Choice program. Again, as asked about in the previous meeting, we just wanted to discuss tiered pricing. So there are a few ways to look at tiered pricing, but based off of our conversation on April 22nd, we discussed tiered pricing as charging different premiums depending on salary. So this is something we could certainly look further at if council has interest. Currently, we don't charge a premium and employee contributions, and therefore would need to in order to have some level of tiered pricing. After consulting with Oswald companies, we identified that some of the challenges that tiered pricing can represent, and they are identified on the screen. All right, coming to our final area of influence, we wanted to share what the current cost share was for 2019. As you can see, there was an 83-17 cost share. So the City of Dublin paid 83% of the total costs, and employees paid 17% of that total cost. In the private sector, it is customary to see a cost share ranging from an 80-20 split to a 70-30 split and even a 60-40 split, with a 70-30 split being the most common right now in the market. Each year, SERB, which is the State Employment Relations Board, gathers data from all employers, and their research indicates that the cost share in the public sector is about 85-15. So when compared to other like entities, we're on par, but we don't really compare to the private sector. In continuing with our cost sharing slide, the following information demonstrates what the city could recuperate from employees by way of a premium. We analyzed what a $25 per pay contribution for single coverage and a $50 and $75 per pay contribution would be for family coverage. With a 25 and 50 premium, so 25 for single, 50 for premium, for family, excuse me, this city would recuperate about $308,000. If we went 25 for single and 75 for family, the city would recuperate $577,000, just shy of $578,000. Keep in mind, a premium would be charged to all employees on the plan, regardless if they use insurance or not.
So I'm not understanding what this premium would be charged for, Jennifer.
It's basically a cost for insurance. So if you're on the plan, you're charged a premium. So every week, some amount of money would come out of your paycheck just to have access to the health insurance.
Okay, so it's not a premium per se, it's a cost. I was just, so this isn't a differentiation by pay level or anything. This is, everybody would pay the same amount.
Correct. Now, if you want us to further explore that, we can do that, but because we don't have a premium, it's much more difficult to discuss tiering. But if we were to have a premium, this is kind of the place that we could start looking at.
So just to clarify, the premium would be charged only for those who are taking the city's insurance, not for
Correct.
those.
Correct. Exactly. It's the
So-
cost to have access to insurance.
So would these things be interchangeable if the dollars that are given to each enrollee in terms of the city's contribution back to, I'm forgetting what those numbers are. What is it? I'm trying to think. 1,200,
Well-
I can't remember, 3,700. I guess what I'm asking is, this wouldn't lower our overall cost anymore. They'd be apples to apples. You could take some out of this bucket or some out of a different bucket.
Right. I'm going to review all of this at the end, but basically all of the things that we've gone through so far are just different levers we could pull that would have some kind of a different outcome. So this employee premium slide literally just equals payroll contribution.
Okay, that's what I'm trying, but there wouldn't be any advantage to us from a bidding or going to the open market on this. This is just dollar for dollar.
Correct. Anything that we've reviewed so far wouldn't have any bearing whether we went out to the market and looked at other carriers.
Thank you.
It's all just internal administration of the plan.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure.
One thing that I'm just kind of looking back as you look at these savings there, 308,000 if you went to a 2550 and 577. If you go back and this would just be worth a little exercise. If you go back and look at, and I'm not promoting either one of these, I just want to say that, but if you go back and look at the HSA and the HRA and increasing the amount that I guess it would be more of a decrease.
It'd be a reduction.
It would be a reduction. It looks as if that, you know, they'll either break even or one will do a little bit better than the other, but it seems as if it kind of all is the same one way or the other. But it looks as if a $400,000 savings in your first one, where you went to 3,000 and 6,000 and 80% instead of 85%. It would be worth the exercise just to see the comparison. Although I don't believe we need to do either one of these at this point, but it's worth the exercise.
Okay, thank you. Another option to consider is a premium to spouses on our plan. In consultation with Oswald Companies, we have learned that it is customary to charge 30% of the fully insured equivalent rate. So we based our calculations off of the cost of a single coverage fully insured rate, which for our plan would be $478.35. The total cost to employees with a spouse in the plan would be $66.23 per pay. With the 226 spouses we have on our plan currently, the city could recuperate $389,000 throughout the year. And that's based off of today's employee and spouse numbers.
And so Jennifer, this is sort of back to my question about how many participants there are in the plan. So you said there's about 375 employees. And so
Correct.
226 out of 375. So
Well, wait, pause
vast
1 second.
majority.
We have just a little bit over 1,000 covered lives on the plan. So
Okay.
we have 375 employees, but of those 1,000 lives, 226 of those are specifically spouses. So if you take your 1,000 minus the 226 employees minus the 375 employees, the rest would be underage dependents.
Got it. Yeah, I think those numbers are really helpful. So maybe we can have a chart on that at another point, because just
Absolutely.
really understanding this mix, and that's basically how many employees would be. I don't know if the word is impacted, but would have a cost difference change here. Just trying to get my head around that. Thanks.
Absolutely. For our next meeting, I can provide that, and I can show you how many employees in each of those sections, and then how many dependents in each of those sections as well.
Jennifer?
Yes.
It's basically a premium to spouses. How does that work for a single parent with children?
If you don't have a spouse in the plan, you wouldn't be charged this premium.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so we just wanted to review a couple of the potential impacts from making any of these changes, again, just as an awareness piece. Clearly, there are potential impacts to making any kind of a change on our plan. The city has enjoyed an excellent turnover rate at 7.3% in 2019. And for the first quarter of 2020, so January, February, and March, we're at 6%. We have used our very generous insurance package as a valuable recruiting tool, and we've been able to boast this generous insurance package for the last decade. So we know any changes will come with an impact to employee morale. Again, they have had unchanged benefits for the last 10 years, and we do anticipate any of the three, or maybe even all of the three unions, potentially using this as a negotiation tool. And we are planning to go into negotiations with all three unions later this summer throughout the rest of the year. So as a reminder, the USW agreed to a 3-year contract with a reopener for this summer on insurance and wages. We have not completed the police negotiations yet. They kind of went on hold when the pandemic happened. And then it is the annual renewal in contract for the FOP OLC, which is our dispatching unit. So to reiterate some of the things that we've discussed, there's a number of controls or levers that we can exercise as a self-insured plan. Each lever we move, such as premiums for all employees, premiums for spouses, increases for deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums, reduction in coinsurance, and reduction in the health savings account or health reimbursement contributions will definitely have an impact on the plan, the city, and all the employees. So each of those levers that we talked about can be moved up and down in a variety of ways. We just highlighted a few of them, and all of them will have some effect on our financial impact. Ultimately, what we needed is direction on if we should continue our traditional approach to our health plan, or if we need to further explore cost recovery or plan design changes. So to give you a little bit of a basis of expenditure related topics, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Stifler.
Good evening, members of the committee. We've spent some time in this presentation examining the tools available to reduce our healthcare related expenditures, but I wanted to provide some additional financial information to recap and detail the variance in these expenditures to help guide the next phase of our discussion. We wanted to put some information on here to kind of discuss if there is a policy target that we're trying to hit here, or if we're just generally trying to reduce these expenditures, because we've identified the tools that we could utilize to hit that policy objective. So first, just to recap, this graph shows the total expenditures related to healthcare spending over the previous 6 years. The number at the top of each bar represents the change in expenditures from the previous year. So as you can see, expenditures have changed from a slight reduction in 2015 to an increase of over $864,000 in 2018. This represents the annual dollar increase in our healthcare spending over time. And as we discussed at the last committee meeting, the change in 2020 is likely significantly less than the $1.4 million budgeted here. It actually looks a lot more like $500,000, as we'll see again in about 3 slides. But detailing these expenditures, they're really a result of 2 different accounts. The first and largest portion, Jennifer, if you could go to the next slide. First and largest portion, there we go, is associated with medical, dental, and prescription vision expenditures. These expenditures have steadily increased from 2015 by approximately $157,000 to a budget increase of $468,000 in 2020. An important thing to note on these expenditures is that as the number of employees in the city increases, there's a corresponding increase in the size of this annual expenditure. So for example, in 2017, the city added 12 employees. In 2018, the city added 7 employees. And in 2020, the city added 10 employees. And these correspond to the largest increases in expenditures in this category. In 2016 and 2019, the 2 smallest increases, the city actually added 0 or 1 employee. So as the number of employees grows, these expenditures grow by a more than inflationary amount, reflecting that increase in employees. Next slide. Second, we've previously discussed our stop-loss insurance premiums, and they're growing by a significant amount annually and are likely to do so in the future. This graph reflects the dollar value of the growth in those expenditures annually. As noted, the $631,000 increase reflected the budget in the fall, and that was later revised down by about $442,000. So the real actual growth in that final category in 2020 is more likely about 200,000 instead of the 600,000 we projected at the budget. But you can see our stop loss expenditures have grown by a minimum of $31,000 in 2016 to over 10 times that amount, $311,000 in 2018. And that's driving a lot of the cost increases in our plan. And then the final slide. So this chart was discussed at our first meeting on this topic, and I wanted to bring it back with some additional information because we had some questions, particularly on 2017. So this chart displays the variance in our healthcare spending by category. The light blue portion reflects the repayment of advances in 2015 and 2017, when the fund balance was a bit of a concern. In both of these years, money was advanced from the general fund to the self-insurance fund and then repaid in the same year. So ultimately, there was no change in the fund balance. There was an increase in revenues to the fund, and there was this corresponding increase in expenditures. For the point of this analysis, these light blue segments can really be ignored. They really are a function of fund accounting and concerns at the time that are past. The purple areas denote an increase in expenditures associated with the NREC expansion. So as I said before, there were a large number of employees added to the payroll in 2017 and 2020, and those were predominantly for the expansion of NREC, Upper Arlington in 2017 and Worthington in 2020. So those increases in healthcare had offsetting revenue in the form of those dispatch fees. As previously discussed, the orange bar in 2020 reflects the difference in stop loss premium that was budgeted versus what will actually be charged. So that is a reduction because of the change in premium. And finally, the smaller dark blue portion reflects the administrative fees that will be recovered and hopefully more as a result of changing our rebate program in 2020. So then finally, what remains is this green bar, which is really the best comparison of the change in healthcare costs on an annual basis over the last 6 years. If the committee would like to develop an acceptable level of increase, a flat, whether that's flat or 2% or 3%, 5%, whatever the level might be, this chart demonstrates that it's very important how you specify that increase be measured, because there are a lot of different factors, including advances and offsetting revenues and a number of employees, an increase in the number of employees that really change the variance on a year-over-year basis. So final chart. Ultimately, this chart is an attempt to identify one way, if the committee was so inclined, to define an acceptable level of growth in healthcare-related expenditures that you might be able to do so. And this chart demonstrates the amount spent on full-time salaries using the green bar, while the blue bar represents the spending on healthcare on an annual basis. The yellow line demonstrates the relationship between these two. And it demonstrates that this relationship has moved from 22.9% in 2016 to 25.1% in 2019. And it's likely that that 26.7% in 2020 will again be reduced because of the reduction in stop loss we've covered a number of times here. Now, there's no correct answer as to what this ratio should be. Ultimately, it's a function of your salary and benefits and the purpose of retaining high quality, attracting and retaining high quality employees. So there is no right ratio here, but if you were to define what a healthcare cost might increase might look like, you could use your full-time salaries as a basis for beginning that discussion. So with that in mind, I'd be happy to turn over for any questions or back to Jennifer for a continuation of our discussion.
Any questions for
Hey,
Matt? Oh.
So you made a comment earlier that we've seen, I'm thinking of, I wrote these numbers down as you were talking here. Let's see if I did this correctly, about the increase in the number of staff. So in 2017, there were 12 and then 18, 7 more. The 2020, those 10, was that the dispatching 10 or was that?
8 were dispatched, 2 were
Okay.
other full-time staff.
So that's 2. So, you know, it's interesting when you look at this slide, because the cost per employee if you were going to do, I'm going to use the same store sales, right, analogy, the cost per employee for insurance, what does that look like? I would kind of like to see this on a cost per employee, because it sort of begs the question. Of course, the more people you hire, the higher number this is going to go, right? So is it a healthcare issue? Is it the size of staff issue? Is it, it gets conflated a little bit in there, right? So when we approve a new staff member or an increase in staffing, of course it's going to bring this with it, right? We flat out know that. And so I think those things are important to sort of separate a little bit so that we can see that a little bit, and hence my question about numbers of staff and people on the plan, et cetera, so forth, because I think that's an important consideration before making changes to the plan, understanding the cost per employee.
Okay.
Is that doable?
Yeah, I think we have some of that information. I'm thinking back to the first slide on some of the slides that Jennifer presented, but yeah, we can definitely get that information.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask it. Well, it's an observation here on this slide. I mean, obviously, the more employees you have, the more expensive, the more money you're going to spend on healthcare. But it looks to me like it only varies 2% over the last 6 years. About. Is that correct, Jennifer? It looks like we're only varying about 2% in what we pay for healthcare for our employees of the full-time cost. Because the most expensive would be this year, and that's dropping 25.5%, and the least expensive was 22.9%. So I feel as if we're holding steady on the percentage that we pay per employee on healthcare. Is that a correct observation?
I think that is a correct observation, that we're holding relatively steady. I mean, there is an increase, right? 22.9 to 25 is a 2% increase. Over 22% is about a 10% increase. So it's not quite steady, but it does show that there isn't this dramatic increase that maybe perhaps we feared when we started down this process. But it does show that this is obviously everybody across the country is concerned about healthcare costs, and we're not immune from those concerns. And this graph kind of demonstrates our reality in addressing those concerns.
Right. And it, interestingly enough, and maybe I'm not really reading it correctly, but if you think about inflation, I would have expected to see the healthcare percentage rise faster than the salary percentage rise. It looks to me like it's pacing fairly equally, I guess I would say. Healthcare to salary is what we're paying. It's not the salary is staying low and the healthcare is rising exponentially.
And I would submit to you that I think that's kind of an indicator that we are tracking very well, because our average salary increase each year for the last 5 years has been about 2%.
Mm-hmm.
So a 2% salary increase overall, and then along with that, you're seeing a variance of around 2%.
Right.
Because we could easily impact this percentage by giving everybody a 5% raise, because
Sure.
that would then drive this percentage down. But
Exactly.
it looks like it's kind of keeping pace with each other. So I think we're right on track then.
Right. I guess what I'm saying
And it also could be a mix of the pay rates, right? Do we have higher paid employees than we did so that's why breaking this down into some levels of granularity are about some of that is important, because what is the average salary per employee? Because it's not just the pay raise, it's who leaves, who hired in, right?
Right. But each employee is receiving equitable healthcare benefits, regardless of what their pay scale. They're still getting, well, of course, it depends on how many family members they have and spouses and that sort of thing. But what I'm saying is the healthcare is equitable across the board.
So
Yeah, that's
Matt,
why looking at it, the cost per unit, because here basically it says you could hire more expensive people and make that number go down.
sure you could, it's a function of math, right?
Mhm,
Um,
That's right.
So Matt, the number on this particular slide, this is sort of all included. This includes our stop loss coverage as well as the actual healthcare coverage, right? This is an all-inclusive percentage.
Yes, this is a total spending out of the 701. So it includes stop loss, the medical premiums, the third-party administrators, the full-time staff that are paid for it out of that fund that do our wellness program. This is everything that comes out of that.
And as you're defining full-time, is that defined as 30 hours per week according to the Affordable Care Act?
I'm defining it by who's in our accounts that are paid on the full-time accounts. I'm not sure how HR would define it.
Gotcha.
I would echo what Matt just said. It is based off of our full-time employees who have access to insurance. However, if we did have somebody through ACA who was eligible for insurance, it would be included in that. But we have not had, we've done a very good job of monitoring that, and we have not had any less than 40-hour per week employees fall into that category.
Actually, that's helpful because, if you extrapolate that into a full-time equivalency, it can affect these numbers as well. So that's why I asked. And I think that it's really hard to want to pull one individual lever at a time to see how you can tweak something by $300,000 or $400,000, right? When you match that up with the potential for recruiting and retaining highly qualified individuals as employees. That being said, you've got to balance that with the fiscal responsibility that we as council have, and the struggle that we're going to have from a financial perspective just because of this pandemic. So this is all kind of coming together at not a great time in history. That's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. And I think everyone is experiencing that to some extent. So, I know that you guys said you didn't have any recommendations for us today, and I think that's fine. I think that discussion is well worth having. I certainly would like to think about some type of a cost benefit analysis when you take a look at these different levers, so that you guys can come to us with, here's sort of the world of reasonable options. Like, I don't think it's reasonable to say, oh, we're just going to increase we're just going to start slapping on a premium and we're going to make that premium $100 a month for everybody. That doesn't pass the reasonable test to me. However, the potential for changing our stop loss amount from 150 to 175, that sounds like it's in the reasonable realm to me. Maybe charging an employee spouse premium, that sounds like it could be in the realm of reasonable to me. What I'd really love to be able to see is a little bit of a cost benefit analysis on what are the reasonable levers we should be considering, and weighing that against recruiting and retention, and then what is a recommendation. That's what I'd love to be able to see, because I think you've got a lot of information in here. It's really packed, chock full of information, and different ways that you can look at this. And so it's a little tough to tease all of that apart and yet still think of it as a whole package. Does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you ready for overall comments now? Are we finished sort of?
I've got I have just a couple more slides, 4 more to be exact.
Okay.
Let's roll.
All right, so just some final thoughts and discussions on our next steps, which you've kind of already started to talk about. Staff is definitely committed to being good stewards of this plan. We will continue to evaluate and seize opportunities to curb plan growth and general spend as we have done in the past. For example, on 1/1/2018, we changed our pharmacy network to a more narrowed network that limited employee options in terms of what pharmacies they filled scripts at, but that did not change their benefits. So we look at all available options to us year after year, and we will continue to go out and look at our stop loss premium and our carriers as allowed to do. If these things aren't working out at some point, council, and if at some point council does have a desire to change the plan design, we can discuss all those different changes, just like Council Member Aluda was just talking about. So actually, I think that is my last and final slide. That is my final slide. I had 2 hidden ones up. I was going to share if questions arose, but yes, let's answer any questions that we can.
Questions, comments? Christina Jane?
I just have, I have a couple comments. One, I'm not a fan of the tiered pricing at all. I don't think that would ever fly very well. I'm also not a fan of changing anything at the present time, but I think that this exercise that you've shown us has been really helpful because you have done an amazing job of looking at all the cost saving measures. I mean, you've twisted it upside down, inside out. I mean, come over and work on my household budget. I think that is an amazing, I mean, we really looked at every aspect. And I think this rebate program is going to be very beneficial. I also think that with this pandemic, the current stop loss program we have might just save the city a ton of money. Hopefully we never have to use it above those, but we're at a really deep unknown, and ICU costs are very, very expensive, as we already know. So I think right now, the ship we're sailing on seems real steady and very confident. I feel very confident that the city's going to be able to take care of our people with what we've put in the bucket here to pay for healthcare. And the only other comment I would make is that I think that the survey that you did to ask the employees what they need, how they can use the health prevention efforts better, I think that also goes a long way of keeping our premiums down over the long term. If we are able to keep our employees healthy due to their efforts, I think it puts us in that category that maybe when it comes to risk factors, are going to be looked at more favorably. Although I don't know how you keep the lid on healthcare insurance premiums down. No, I think you can flip yourself upside down and put yourself in a bubble and they're still going to go up. So you're doing everything you can. And I think we're good where we're at right now. So those
Thanks
are my
for
thoughts.
Jane, I think that given the current situation, I'm not in a big hurry to make a bunch of changes.
Mm-mm.
I think they're certainly worth having discussions about, especially as we talk about moving into 2021 and 2022. There's some things in here that I don't have a great taste for, and others that I think we should definitely be thinking about. I think we got to pause for just a minute with everything that's happening with the pandemic. Not sure where things are going to fully shake out from a fiscal perspective for the city, just overall. I don't really think we're going to know what the full financial impacts of this pandemic are going to be, probably for 8 to 10 years, really. Not saying we should pause for 8 to 10 years. I'm just saying we should pause for a minute.
Right.
I feel okay about the direction that the plan has been headed. I do feel like you guys have been really good stewards of the plan and kind of turning over every rock to see what you can find. And when you do find something, taking advantage of that. And I think that our staff should be very appreciative of the work that you do, because they have to understand what a difficult balance it is to balance the needs of the employee in terms of their health care with the financial health of the city, because they sometimes are at odds with each other. I would be at a point where I would actually like to see some additional Healthy by Choice, kind of a double down for folks, because I think not only are we going to see issues with people getting sick from the virus, we're going to continue to see some ongoing mental health issues that I think are going to need to be addressed. And I do think that's an area of focus that would be worthwhile, for us to be thinking about. And I don't know, maybe I should have specifically looked this up before the meeting, but Jennifer, do you know how much sort of integrative medicine that the plan covers? And I'm thinking about things like massage therapy or acupuncture, ways that people can take a look at both modern Western medicine, as well as integrating that with more some traditional holistic medicine.
We do have some options for things like that, but they typically are out of network. So people could use their health savings account or health reimbursement dollars for that, but it's not built into the general plan design that would keep people in network. We also have a discount program available through United Healthcare, and they do offer a variety of vendors that offer 20 to 30% off of those services. But again, it's not in our network
Yeah.
Now, can I add one additional thing? We do have a really strong employee assistance program that we monitor closely to see what the utilization looks like. And if we want to talk more about that, I don't have that data with me tonight, but I do have all of that data. And we have seen a really good utilization of that. Now it's been too recent this last 2-month period to tell you if that's increased or not. I'm assuming that it's going to, but we offer our employees 6 sessions with a counselor, and many of the counselors through our EAP are in our network, and so they can access those people once those 6 visits, and that's 6 visits per particular issue. So pandemic is a very different issue than any other issue that we had before March of this year. So people can do that now telephonically as well. I'm assuming they're going to continue that once the pandemic is over, but it makes it even easier to access any mental health support that you might need, because you can, like you talked about last week, is just being able to do telemedicine right from your computer, not having to drive anywhere and see somebody. So we are doing a very big push on that every opportunity that we can with our employees right now.
I would like to see, and there's no way you can do this right now, but maybe it's sort of prepping for it. I would love to see, as we get through the remainder of this plan year, what the savings in, honestly, overall time not taken off of work for doctor's appointments because people have leveraged telemedicine, because I think that is a benefit in terms of it's really, you're defraying cost, right? You're not, people are not taking their paid time off or their sick time or whatever to have to go to a doctor's appointment. So that's actually a benefit both to the employee, I think, and to the city, because you're not losing productivity as they're taking that time off. So I think that would be something really interesting to track. I also think it'd be really interesting to track, as you already just said, the employee assistance program utilization, particularly for the remainder of this year. Because I do think it's a really, really important benefit that a lot of people don't use. It tends to be one of those sort of hidden benefits unless you're thinking about it on a more regular basis. So I think that would be really important as well. I'd love to have some idea of what the utilization is of some of the other programs, like the CHIP program. And I know that one's fairly new, right?
Yes, it was our pilot session. And I think we had 24, 26, too many numbers tonight, people who participated in it. They completed the entire program, and we wanted to see how a pilot program would go. And so our hope was to be able to offer that again in the future.
That's great. Yeah, but those kinds of utilization numbers I think would be also really helpful. And you guys have a really, really, I mean, we have a very high compliance rate with people who are getting the help that they need in terms of preventative medicine for those higher diseases that tend to have some comorbidities with them. And I thought that was one of the most impressive numbers.
We do. We see very good compliance compared to United Healthcare's book of business. And a lot of that is attributed to the education that we do and our wellness program, and how much we really drive those very important topics home with our employees.
So Jennifer, do we know back to that last slide that we were talking about, you don't need to put it up, about the percentage of benefits to salaries. I don't know where I'm getting this number, but in sort of private or commercial, hasn't that exceeded 30% pretty much for, is that a low industry number?
Are you talking in terms of cost share, or are you talking about Matt's financial slide?
No, that last slide, we were talking about the cost of benefits relative to salary. And I don't know where I have this in my mind, that industry, I don't know if that was something you shared previously or whatever, exceeded 30% on average. Do we have data on that?
I don't have anything that I can speak to at this exact moment, but we certainly can bring some data back for our next discussion.
Again, sort of back to, I think, the points that have made earlier across the board. I think that the city, I think the employees have done amazing work to keep the numbers where they are. I mean, I actually think that those percentages are lower than you're going to see across the board. And I don't know where I'm getting that. Maybe I've read that, but they're in somewhere in the 30s is what seems to be sticking in my mind.
You know, we have our Oswald representatives here. We
Oh,
have
good.
Stefan and Tessa. I don't know if either one of them has that information that they might want to speak to from what they've seen in the private sector.
Please.
This is Stefan. Do I have to turn my video on while I'm speaking too?
You
Is
don't
that
have to.
protocol?
It's up to you.
Okay. I agree with you, Ms. DeRosa, that I believe that your percentage falls under what we would see as standard in the private sector. I don't want to give actual statistics here, but when you guys were going through that slide, being in the low to mid 20s, I felt was a bit under, call it benchmark. We can easily pull that stuff for you all and have it prepared for your next session, or supply Jennifer with it as a follow-up.
That would be great. Just one other indicator about how it's being managed, because I think I can say from my experiences in the private sector, those numbers were in the 30s, but I don't know what today's number is. So yeah, that would be great. So I think you heard from both Christina and Jane that I'm looking for head nods that we'd like, I'm paraphrasing here now. We'd like to see this brought forward to council, real focus on the great work you guys have done to keep those numbers where they are. But at this point, we haven't seen some specific recommendations. We're not asking you to make a recommendation to lower cost at this point, given the situation that we're in. Is that what I'm just trying to not make a bunch more work for staff here if we're not. Certainly always continuing to look ways to reduce costs, which you have done. And I'm anxious for council to see the amount of work here, because it's just outstanding. But we're not really asking the staff to go back and do more work for recommendations, are we, at this point?
I don't believe so. I think they've done a really great job. And the only thing that I would like to see, and it's not extra, it's just, I think we've lowered it as much as we can. But what you're doing is you're improving health on the other end by your efforts in prevention. And I think that we need to showcase a little bit more, because we can only lower costs to a point, but we can improve health a whole lot more. And we need to be your cheerleaders there and promote that with our staffs. And that'll be a benefit that is priceless, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need a little bit more, frankly, some marketing around some of the great stuff that the on that positive end of being, healthy by choice, and the effects that that's had on staff. I really think we need to just take a minute before we have staff go back and do a whole heck of a lot more work on this. I'd be super open to talking about it, next year for the follow. I just don't, right now, we just need to take a minute.
So maybe from a committee report to council, is that we go through some of the slides and put together an overview, because I do think it's so important for all of council to hear this. And I might ask Matt, you make the adjustments in those numbers as the revised budget, because that takes what was a huge increase down to a more reasonable reality. And I think we reflect those in the numbers as you have. Get a few more of these benchmark numbers and take it back to council as is, without a bunch more work, with a recommendation from this committee that we take a pause, given the situation that we're in, as we look at the holistic budget moving forward. Is that, I'm getting head nods from my colleagues here. Is that agreeable with staff?
Madam Chair, this is Dana, if I may.
Please.
I don't know, Homer or Jennifer, you want to weigh in on timing with bargaining unit agreements and negotiations and the like? Let's speak now as to any concerns we might have with that, or otherwise advise me as I sit here as to whether we need to go back as staff and huddle on that and come back either to the committee or make that part of any recommendation we would have to council.
Well, I see Homer just unmuted. Homer, you go first. I'll go second.
No,
But I
I
wanna
was
get into
just getting
negotiating.
myself lined up to go after you, so go ahead.
I'm really not talking about negotiating points as much as I am timing issues. Should we retreat and talk about that and how that fits into all this?
I think possibly we should, because of what Councilmember Aludo said, with so much unknown and getting ready to go into 3 bargaining units to lock in a 3-year contract. There's just complications that come from that. And we're so new into this crisis, it's really hard to predict what we want 3 years to look like when we don't even know what tomorrow looks like.
Okay.
So,
I'll take that, members of the committee, I'll take that responsibility as city manager to advise on, I really appreciate your time and effort in understanding the intricacies of the plan and all the various associated costs. So I'll take that one on and we'll go back and think about that from our perspective relative to timing with negotiations and things like that. Because I would agree too that, a couple more months, as we just briefed council last week, we still need a window here of visibility on this whole situation. So similar to what you're saying here, we also don't know how just the overall budget's going to be impacted, period. So, okay, great. Well, thanks for letting me step in on that and ask that question. I appreciate it.
Great. So I guess just here for clarity, Dana will await some more feedback from the group, and then we'll get it on as appropriate and from a timing perspective, get an overview and staff recommendation on a future council.
Correct. Yeah, I think, if the committee feels good about going on back to council sooner rather than later with your findings, that's fine. And then as staff at the same time, we can weigh in. That gives us a little bit of time to weigh in on this whole timing aspect with negotiations. So we will be prepared to speak to that. We don't have all the answers that night. We don't have to have them that night, but we can raise that.
All right. Well, we'll look to you guys' suggestions on that, because I know you're working through what is a larger set of overall numbers for moving forward. And as you said, we're early in on that. So whenever that makes sense. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Jennifer and Matt, wow, you've done amazing work and we so appreciate it. And we so
Our
appreciate our advisors for joining us this evening. And I guess before we let them go, I don't know if there's anything they feel that they would like to add, but we appreciate them being with us this evening.
I think I would ruin an extremely good presentation by Jennifer and Matt if I attempted to add anything to it. So they've done a fantastic job and they've prepared diligently for it. So job well done to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And thank you for your help and support. Okay.
And I'd echo Stefan's comments as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will move on to the next item on the agenda. And I guess, Homer, I will turn that over to you. Is that right? You're going to present or at least frame the discussion?
Yeah, I'll frame the discussion up. So again, thank you for all your consideration and everything and all your comments, from the health benefits piece of this that we just completed. So the Human Rights Campaign has a municipality equality index. It gets published every year, and we had provided council with a memo last fall. And the reason we provided that memo, just to kind of refresh everybody's memory, is the 2019 report had come out, and it hit the media. And on there, it showed most of the state, the 6 largest cities, in the state at 100 points. Lakewood, Ohio was like 87, and Dublin was at 31 points. And so it was kind of after the fact, the scorecard had come and gone, and it's a scorecard that's been in existence for several years now at this point. But for whatever reason, last year it caught some media attention. And so we were, trying to respond to what was already a perceived negative perception of that. We're all used to when you, go to school and you get 100 on a paper, it's an A. If you get something below 50, it's an F. And we were at 31, so it looked really bad. But I would submit to you, it's a matter of perspective. It's whatever paradigm you're looking at. Just some facts and figures. There's 176 cities in, the state of Ohio, and there's over 19,000 across the nation. But the HRC MEI index only measures 506 cities, and it only looked at 8 cities in the state of Ohio. The 6 largest ones, and then they ignored, everybody else. So I would submit to you that there are 19,000 other cities across the nation that aren't even looked at on this scorecard. And, the one thing I haven't given you is the overall MEI index, the national report that lists all 506 cities on it. And I will tell you that I went through and counted the number of cities that had 100 points, and it was 15% of the 506 that actually had 100 points. Every other city around the nation was scattered somewhere else, on that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to share my screen with you here, so you can kind of see. Can everybody see this this chart with all the dots on it? If you can see my little arrow here, I would put Dublin is probably that dot right there. Okay, in terms of our MEI score was 31, and we're a little bit less than 50,000 people, so we're right about there. And the thing about this graph is, if you look across the bottom of it, it actually layers on the small cities on top of the medium cities on top of the large cities. So it's got 3 different scales across the bottom. So that 15% is all those cities that are right across the top up there. But you can see Dublin is not quite in the middle of it, but that's about where we're at. So I just wanted to share that screen with you so you could kind of see that this is all over the place when you look at the national scorecard. And there's plenty of cities that have points less than us. Matter of fact, if you look down along that bottom of the scale there were several cities that actually had 0 points. But they're part of the 506 that are being looked at by the Human Rights Campaign, which I'm not going to reread the memo to you, but they're basically a group, and it's a civil rights group, and they're looking to gain support. So my point is the way I look at this is we are doing something, we are doing some things, and we have earned 31 points. For the work that we have done in terms of benefiting the LGBTQ community. So it's just how you look at it. We have done 31 points worth of work, in the city of Dublin, and we should be proud of that. Having said that, let me get my notes back up here where I can see them. So I talked about, there's 8 cities, 19,000. Okay, there are some things that we can do, and the memo that we sent you, the things that's on the last page are really our opportunities for where we can earn some points. At the top of that last page, there's basically 3 areas that are talked about. One of them is implementing some LGBTQ training, which we have actually already developed in Cornerstone. We just have not, as of today, required all the employees to take that training. But we can do that very easily just by putting the word out there and requiring all of our employees to go on and do that online training. So that'll get us a couple points. The other thing we can do, and I've talked to Chief Pice, is establish a liaison in the police department that is an LGBTQ liaison that would intake any concerns or issues from that community that pertain to the police department. And he's already got somebody identified that is willing to do that. The next thing we can do that they ask for is to have a liaison in what they call the city executive's office. So I read that, the city manager's office, on a daily basis. And we actually have another employee that is volunteered to take that on as an additional duty to intake any concerns from the community, things like that, and advance them to the city manager. So we can gain another 10 points that way. So our 31 points can increase by 17 to about 48 points rather rapidly. The other things that we have on the scorecard there are things that would, actually take some more action by city council, for us to establish. One of those things, and it's actually, it says 34 possible points there. It's actually broken into several different areas in terms of employment, housing, and public accommodations. There's a potential of 10 points in each one of those areas. Plus there's some other bonus points for different things when you look at the criteria. Then the next area is, the potential of setting up a human rights commission that would, again, just look at, advancing LGBTQ initiatives, in the city or on behalf of the city. You could add another 2 points onto that commission if you actually give them some kind of an enforcement capability. Meaning they would be able to issue a right to sue, letter, based upon their investigation. The other areas, there's 12 possible points that could come out of law enforcement if we would start reporting hate crimes. The problem is we keep reporting, we don't report any hate crimes because we haven't had any hate crimes in Dublin that I know of, and their stance is we have to have hate crimes in order for us to get 12 points for reporting them. So those are points that I would prefer that we never get. I would think that all three of you would not want to get those points either, because that would mean something bad is happening in Dublin. And then the last, 5 points that we see that's available on that memo is 5 points if we actually have a member of council that has self-identified as being part of the LGBTQ community. So there's another 5 points there. There are some other points, for providing services for LGBTQ youth, homeless, elderly, those with HIV or AIDS, that kind of thing, that we can pick up as well. So all that said, we can pick up 17 points pretty quickly just by appointing a couple of people to be liaisons and establishing the training. The other things would take, specific action from council to establish either a legislation or this human rights commission. And that's about the long and short of it. So other than that, again, we wanted to get guidance from you because this is going to come around again. They're going to send us out a scorecard in June. July 31st is what we have, the time we have to review that and then respond by, and then the next scorecard will come out in the October timeframe. So I would think that if we could, at the very least, have a proactive message, and Sue, that's why I've got her on this meeting. If we can be in front of this, whatever the decision is, and we can message it and engage the media before the report comes out, and we can talk about what we are doing and what we have done, then it may not look as bad in the media when it comes back around again in the fall. And I'll shut up and let you talk.
Thanks, Summer. Do you guys mind if I hop in?
Oh, go ahead.
Cool. So look, I think whatever you guys can do internally as staff that doesn't cost a bunch of money to do, and if it's 17 points or 12 points or 30 points or whatever, if we've got people who are wanting to volunteer to take on a liaison role, I think that's fantastic, and I think we should do it, right? Do you have some examples of the type of legislation that they're talking about? Because some of it may be applicable to the city of Dublin, and some of it just might not be. And I'm not I'm not interested in bending over backwards to try to enact a piece of legislation that doesn't fit or isn't meaningful or can't be enforced in the city of Dublin. So some examples might be helpful if you can wrangle some of those up. I'm not interested in asking any member of council or a city manager to disclose their sexual orientation if that's not what they're predisposed and inclined to do. I think that's something that we cannot control and should not control. And if we happen to have someone on council or, in the city manager's seat that is wanting to openly identify as such, then great, we luck out. But if we don't, I'm not in the business of saying we really need for someone to identify this way. I think that has to be a totally personal choice. Yeah, I agree about the hate crimes. I really would I don't want to earn those 12 points. They can keep them as far as I'm concerned. That feels like I think those last two feel very unfair, because it's, you got to have people who are willing to run for office. And frankly, I don't really care what their sexual orientation is. I want someone who cares and loves this city enough to get up here and do the hard work that we do for just about nothing. Sometimes a lot of pain, but sometimes a lot of joy. Like, it's a labor of love. I wouldn't have run for re-election if I didn't think that way. It doesn't really matter, who I go to bed with at night. It just matters that I want to do what's right for the city. And I just don't like that one very much. And I'll just say that on the record, because I think people can do good work regardless of who they love. They can love whomever they want, and they can be just as smart as the next person who loves somebody else, and just as passionate and just as effective. And it really doesn't matter. So I'm done with my soapbox on that one. I just don't like that one. I would like to see some examples of legislation. I'm not really in the business of letting a civil rights group tell me how to run the city. If they want to tell me how to run this city, they can live here and they can run for council.
Yeah, so I guess to answer your question about the legislation, the thing I would say is, there are plenty of federal laws and there's plenty of state laws. By us enacting specific employment, housing, and public accommodations, laws at the municipal level, the city of Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati are large enough and big enough that they have the court systems to adjudicate those things. And have those kind of laws on their books. Quite frankly, we rely on the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. We rely on the EEOC, to help us out with those kind of things. And we rely on state law, and there's enforcement mechanisms for that. I can tell you, to answer a question that Kathy had asked me previously, I did look at the Westerville and Worthington, actions that they took last year, and both of them also refer to the Ohio Civil Rights Commission at some point, or to an agency of the city of Columbus that they're in partnership with. I don't know, without going back to the Human Rights Commission and asking them if those kind of arrangements would qualify us for the points here or not. I think they're looking for something that we have as a law and that we are adjudicating ourselves. Because we have talked to them previously about how we rely on the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, and they have said doesn't count. You need to have your own legislation and you need to enforce it yourself. So I hope that answers your question or helps answer the question.
Well, it does some, but why would we enact legislation that we really cannot enforce? And that just doesn't even make sense to me. I would like to get a little more information about what they're talking about there. Just so that we have it in the back of our minds so that we know what it is. Like I said, I think that if there's things that we can do internally where we're having liaisons or whatever it is, kind of at the beginning of this last page of this, I think we should. I think those are good things to do. I think training, honestly, why wouldn't you do the training? I mean, we require all kinds of training for all kinds of different things. And I think implicit bias and making sure that folks understand that there are just different people out there that are different from them and they're different from others, I think is a good thing. Education is always a good thing when it's done with good intention, of course, and good content. I don't know why we wouldn't do those things. I don't know.
I can certainly go and I can certainly get that examples of that legislation and what they would consider acceptable.
Jane?
Yeah, I'm curious, Homer, in this. It seems like it's an arbitrary evaluation of whether or not we are non-discriminate. I look over the city and I think to myself, we're such a diverse community. We don't have any hate crimes. On the Human Rights Commission, I think of how we bring people together for the Martin Luther King table, and we sit with everybody from all genders, all orientations, all ethnicities, all colors, all religions, and we do that ongoing all year long. I mean, it's interesting that they have to have a organization when we live it here in Dublin. Yet it's so natural to us that we don't even look at it as a program, right? It's just what we do.
Well, I will say to their credit, when you look in their actual, the national report that's about 76 pages long, there's a section in there where they talk about, does this scorecard indicate, how good the community is in terms of, is it an LGBTQ friendly community or not? And they come out and say, this is not, a judgment about the community itself, or the city itself. It's about the legislation and the policies that they have in place. So they do acknowledge that some, cities that have 100 points may be a bad place for an LGBTQ, person to go live, while other cities that may have no points or very low points is probably a very good place for them to go.
Right.
So they do acknowledge that in their report.
Right.
Yeah, but when people see the number, they're not going to read that disclaimer. That's the problem.
Exactly. And I think it speaks to us. But what I would ask you is this. We're all about partnerships in this community, partnerships with the schools, with Centera, with the religious, with the nonprofits. So do we as a city have to be solely responsible for this? Or are the efforts in our school systems that do deal with counseling for LGBT and programs for LGBTQ and Centero, that you have the ability to go and have counseling there, they speak to some of those? I mean, does that not count in this point system?
Let me go back and research that one. I do know that there was some specific stuff in there about anti-bullying, that came specifically from the schools that they actually modified and took out. So it was, an effort, beyond just the city proper and involved the school system as well. So let me go back and see if we can get credit for those kind of partnerships and things like that as well. I'm not sure that it's real clear in their criteria.
Okay, I think that's just worth looking at. I mean, I agree that I think that we should do the things that you suggested. That's not a problem. I believe that if we're going to spend time and effort on human rights, which I think we do on a daily basis, I would much prefer to spend our time where you actually see some success, and that is in maintaining our partnerships with the religious community, with the LGBTQ community. We do it as a city, and I think that will, in the end, what you really want to do is have a non-discriminate city, right? That's what you want. And I don't know that getting points on this evaluation will give us that effect. So I kind of like the way we're doing it now, and I could defend it easily because of the partnerships we have, and I would prefer to do it that way. But I think we should always visually and with great intention do what we think that we can do without just doing it to check off a box, right?
I agree with you, Jane. I thinking about establishing a human rights commission, I assume this would be a citizen-led commission, just as our other boards and commissions are. I don't know that would be a terrible thing to do. I think that if that's something that we might be interested in, that's something we need to bring back to the rest of council, right? Because that's something that has to be decided at a council level. Look, we're always having people who want to participate in local government, and boards and commissions are an excellent way to do that. I'm not opposed to researching that a little bit and trying to determine what that might entail. I don't know that I necessarily want to give them quite all the powers that they've listed here in this document. But we have a citizens advisory committee. We've got, we've got a bike ambassadors group, right? That's not to say that we couldn't either include this with one of the other committees that we have, or have a commission, in its own right. But that's something that has to be discussed at the council level. Now we can make a recommendation to move that away from this committee and into council. But I don't think I'd be comfortable making a recommendation on that one at all without the full council's input. Same with legislation.
I just want to say one more thing.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. Homer, I have a question. What specific things to support the LGBTQ community do we do at the city? What would be on that list?
It's mostly in our employment practices, and that's where we're getting most of our points from. The transgender bathrooms, that we have in the rec center, our policy that we have about, the bathroom use and all of the rest of our facilities. And the other thing we get some points for is our healthcare. If somebody,
I'm not talking about earning points on this. I'm just talking in general. I mean, I listening to both of my colleagues here about the things that we have in practice today or in partnership today. I don't know that I could point to some place where I could articulate those or where those would be listed or how we would think about it. So if I was someone that was looking for an overall assessment and this particular index did not exist, how would I do that rating? How would I have a sense of that participation, I guess? And a little head scratching there. So, I mean, we talk about doing comparisons to, industry standards and this and that. I mean, I don't know what else there is. What other standards other than this particular index would we look to guide our, not whether we're intentional or not, but rather we thought about, here's a best practice that's happening in a community in our neighborhood. And as we said earlier, well, gee, why wouldn't we do some of those things? Because those are important things. So if we were going to go look at this, how would we as a council, as a committee here, index aside, or maybe this index is the best thing that's out there that helps us through that. So that's sort of a question I would have that I think would be a useful, I don't know if that's a document or a list or a conversation about how extensive our work is here. And I see Dana maybe it was lighting up. Dana, you want to make a comment there?
I would add the council did pass a resolution, Homer, 2-3 years ago about equitable treatment in the city. We've taken that down to the State House. I think we did that in support of a House bill or something that was going on down there. So there's that overarching statement that council has made to be non-discriminatory, and that listed a lot of things and added the LGBTQ community to that. And even though we tend to show that to this indexing group, that tends to not carry much water. It's what they want and how they want it. And I got that. I mean, I understand the reasons why they do this and come to certain communities, especially, and lift us up as the example of what to do or what not to do or what we're not doing. So, so we are really, in a big way, responding to just this index. And to your point, Vice Mayor DeRosa, this is, as we've interacted with our peers, and we've called around with our peers on this very issue and this index and some of these measures, it's kind of all over the place. And we'll continue to look for that primary benchmark, but I don't know. We'll see if we can find one. I don't know of one. As I've talked to my peers, I don't know of one. We did, as Homer mentioned, look at Worthington, Westerville. They had some interesting processes on this the last couple of years. Westerville had a group out of the university there come forward asking for them to take certain actions, which they did, and they put into an ordinance, as did Worthington, did something similar. So we are trying to benchmark off of some of those practices as well.
So I mean, I think that would be useful as I reflected upon it. Anytime there's an indice or a scorecard, there's always things that apply or don't apply to a particular community by the nature of a standardized. But often, if they're widespread, there are important things in there, right? There are useful things, as we've discussed tonight. So, part of pulling together, these are the things we're doing. We have resolutions, we have that. I think that's a useful thing to do, even if we never had this index discussion. Because it was interesting, Jane and I were in the Public Services Committee tonight, and we were talking about mobility and the importance of mobility. And I wrote this down Because it seems like all of our subjects tonight are really come together. And it makes a comment about important for us to be a prosperous, inclusive community. And so it's just so important that we continue to reflect on these things in my opinion. So I think if there are things, as you mentioned earlier, that we could do and have liaisons, I think I heard from both of my colleagues here that we should be, because every day we wake up and those are the things we worry about. Are we working towards being as safe as we can be, as inclusive as we can be, as prosperous as we can, all of those things that, people have rights to live great lives because because we're working hard to make that happen. So this needs to be on that list, and it is, and we know it is. So to me, I think of these as useful things to say, here's one more set of benchmarks, and how are we doing against those? If there's things we can do that we think make sense, then thank you for the benchmark to help us do it, because we should. And so, that's sort of my reflection on it. And make sure we're communicating it. So, just as we were having the healthcare benefits conversation earlier, those things that are happening, if there are liaisons, if there are pieces of work, what are we doing to communicate that, to make sure everybody in the community is aware? And then if somebody in the community says, I don't think that's good enough, or I don't think that's strong enough to support others, then then they bring that forward, and we embrace that, and we do what we need to do to move that forward. So
yeah, Kathy, I like that a lot. I think that making decisions based on an index seems silly to me. We do some great stuff in this community to make things as equitable as we can, and we should be gathering those together regardless of this index. Look, indexes are nice. It kind of wraps everything up in this nice little, here it is, thing, and that's great. But to Kathy's point, spoken like a true marketing person, we should have that stuff all gathered together, so that we can be telling people at a moment's notice when they ask us or when they need something, look, here's what we have, here's what we're doing, here's what we're working on. Kathy, I think that's a great point.
I think, just to tag onto that, Kathy, if we do gather up all the things that we know that we're doing, it's an opportunity to share that with the community. And what's more important to me is not whether or not we get 31 points. We need to ask the community, are we doing enough for you? Do we need to do more for you? And if we do, how can we do that? And so I'd rather share what we do and ask the community to respond to that, because there are lots of parents who have kids that might be struggling, and maybe they don't know where these resources are, or others who might be struggling in the workforce. Whatever it is, they need to respond to us and let us know what their needs are. That's a better indicator of how we're doing.
I really like to add that I really feel that our internal practices relative to our employees and the like probably meet about every benchmark you're going to make. It's how we're interacting with the general public becomes the real policy question here. And what Homer is trying to show you is this is an example of an outside organization, frankly, checking you against giving you a grade card on how you're doing. So the question becomes, do we pursue these things like this process for adjudication? Do we have a local, for lack of a better word, court to address that? Do we create a citizen advisory group to address this very issue? I guess what I would pose back to you is you don't have any of that. You don't have any of that. And therein lies sort of the underlying question with this index starts to raise up. Do we start to take those kinds of things on? Because as a community, we really haven't. And it's not to say, and believe me, I feel exactly the way you all do listening in on, our door's always open. We're always, we're an open community. We're willing to help anybody. And I think as a result of that, we don't go around worrying about and thinking about this very much with specific groups, but any specific group feels they need to have certain access in certain ways and that sort of thing. And this is how they're measuring that. So the point is, I don't think we have a lot. I don't think we have much inventory. when it comes to what we're doing as a community externally. I think we're pretty righteous internally with our employees. I don't think we're very, I think we do good work. I think a lot of the points, I hate to go back to the points thing, but that is the index before us. We are doing a lot of those things. The question is, do we go to the other levels that they're suggesting? And we can look for other indices as well, although I don't know that there are any out there, but we can go look at them. So.
Well, I think Dana.
On this list, that big scattergram, there's some very small communities that, what if we looked at that scale, are doing more than we're doing today, right? Maybe they're not scoring 100, but they're doing some things.
That's very true. Lakewood right here would be in Ohio is an example of that.
Yeah. So again, I think it's important that we ask these questions. And I think it's important that we look out and say, are there other things we need to be doing that the community thinks are important here on this index and any other of the, prosperity, quality of life, safety, inclusiveness index. And so I'm struggling with a little bit of maybe what the appropriate next step is here, but I think we should noodle on how to do that.
Well, I would suggest, this is great input. What I would suggest is we'll go look and see if there are any other indices like this out there. I don't think there are, but if there are, they're not very obvious, but we'll go out and see if we can scour and find something. We continue to benchmark off other communities and what they're doing. I know we were looking at Lakewood and trying to say, okay, why is it y'all are doing so well on this and you're doing differently? And it's just because they're doing some of those other things that we don't currently have. So, we can try to come back, Homer, I don't know, with a more specific list. You feel that's appropriate, or you want to continue to use this benchmark, or do you think there might be something else out there? I know Homer, being an HR professional, knows, the employee side of this. It's that external, again, engagement piece that we'll need to do some exploring on.
Yeah, I think it's important to know, we're speaking for a segment of the community that maybe we don't know what they need. And I guess that's worth a community conversation to find out what we're doing, know what we're doing first and foremost, with all the partnerships that we have, where are all the resources? And then secondly, maybe it's worth a community conversation to ask folks to come together and talk to us about what's needed, because I don't really want to chase, this unless we're actually making a difference for people. I guess that's what I'm saying. So maybe a community conversation is important.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that, Jane, because it is hard to try to represent a part of our constituency that maybe we don't have a good grasp on. I think I'd be really open to having a community conversation. And maybe part of that community conversation is bringing this index to that conversation to say, would these things make sense for our residents? Is this what they think they need? I don't know. I would be very interested in that.
Okay, so from a next step perspective, it sounded like on that index, the liaison, those might be relatively, I don't want to say easy, because nothing's ever easy when you add more, but positive steps, and you have people who raise their hands to say, yay, I'll raise my hand, I'll be in a liaison to the community. And it is maybe actually through those liaisons we can begin to have some of these conversations, right? Because they're going to hear these things. So maybe as a next step, establishing those liaisons and doing the training will create the beginning part of that dialogue. And then we begin to have some community discussions. I'm seeing some head nods here, if that's a way forward.
That was exactly where I was going to go with the comment a minute ago, is let's get these liaisons established and let's see what kind of feedback they're getting. They may get very little, they may get a whole lot, but I think we should get them in place and kind of gauge, what they're hearing, and then we can come back and, look at further options from there.
And do a little more exploring, if you would, from the resident side, from what are some of our colleague communities around, not to add a bunch of work to your plate, but I think that would be a really useful thing, because there's lots of dots on that index. So there's got to be a lot of amazing things going on out there, right?
Yeah.
Other comments, thoughts on this? No? Okay. I appreciate, Homer, you bringing that to the committee and for discussion. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for your comments, Aaron.
So last comment is I've just sort of asked that if we have the Dublin 2035 framework sort of as a standing item on our agenda. We don't always have to have conversations about it, but I think if it doesn't sit in some committee, it's such a big beast as we talked about last time that we won't have another venue where we can do that very effectively. I sent out an email to council to get people's choices of what subgroups they might want to work in. So I've heard back from almost everybody. I've got one more council person to hear from. And then I'm going to have a conversation later this week with Dana and Homer and staff about how do we begin to populate those subgroups. And then we can talk more about that at the next meeting. That makes sense? Cool. Anything else for the committee tonight? Other items we might want to bring forth at this time?
I can't think of anything.
Jane and I have been staring at ourselves and each other for the last 4
I
hours.
know, I'm sort of brain dead. It's been 4 hours of on-stop Zoom meetings. I don't know. I can't think of anything.
I
Yeah.
can't think of anything either. I don't have mine back to back, except I have one tomorrow. So I feel you. Thank you guys for all your work. And
Yeah.
thanks to work. We covered a lot of stuff tonight. And staff just did a phenomenal job at putting together the data and just being thorough and following through for us. And those are hard decisions and hard conversations to have because they affect people's daily lives. And so I just really appreciate it. Kathy and Jane, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work that we're doing on this committee together. So thanks.
Thank you. All right. I guess we'll see you all virtually again soon then. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Good night
all.
all.